Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Kyle Bechet, Digital Communications Manager here at the Leadership Institute. Today we'll be talking about should you be a candidate? Joining us to talk about this is LI's Vice President of Development, Steven Sutton. Thanks for joining us, Steve.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Steve, before coming to the Leadership Institute, was a Chief of Staff in the House of Representatives for more than 14 years. As Chief of Staff, he helped set up their offices, hired staff, managed and directed operations from 4 different congressmen's Washington and district offices. In addition, he helped them get reelected, directing their campaign strategies, messages, and voter contact programs. Steve is also a favorite lecturer here at the Leadership Institute, so I'm sure that today we're going to have a great conversation about should you be a candidate. But before we get into that, I want to encourage you, as always, to send in your questions to live@leadershipinstitute.org or tweet them at us using our hashtag LIWebinar. With that, Steve, what do you have to do to be a candidate? What kinds of things do people have to do before they make that plunge into running an election?
Well, there's 2 parts to that. The first is people run without being prepared to win. Mm-hmm. So I always think that you should run to win. There's other reasons to run, build a movement and build an organization for different purposes. But if you're running to win, it's generally, as I learned it, there are 5 things that you need to be the best, to have the best chance of winning. The first thing is you have to really want to do it. Fire in the belly. Running for office is tough, and so you have to be highly motivated to do it. The second thing you need in order to win is a winnable district. There are just some districts out there that it doesn't matter how great a job you do, how well prepared you are, your chances of winning are dim. I grew up.
You're talking about, your deep California, San Francisco districts.
I grew up in New York City in the Bronx,
right.
So that's one of the areas. And then when I was 13, we moved to Massachusetts, and there's another area.
I grew up in Vermont. I know exactly.
Even better example. So a winnable district is, and different people can interpret that differently, but for the sake of the brief discussion, that is helpful. A third is a weak or vulnerable opponent. There are just certain people that if you want to run against them, you're just not going to beat them. They're very popular, and that's helpful. And by the way, you don't need all 5 of these things. Mm-hmm. I've worked with candidates, and all we had was one of the 5. So,
for instance, a vulnerable opponent in a lean red or green blue district could win without having the winnable district all 100% of the time. Yeah. Scott Brown in Massachusetts, for instance.
Right. That was kind of the perfect storm of a few things.
Right.
And he had a couple. The last 2 things he had in large measure. So we'll get to those in a second. But as far as a vulnerable opponent. And different people are vulnerable on different things. Mm-hmm. We can't go into all the things now, but we do discuss them in the school that we have on future campaigns. And so how do you gauge that? And you can do it with metrics and with polling, I suppose, or just a general feeling. I mean, if there's a buzz out there and a person's not been showing up for his votes or is doing things that are bad or voting poorly, those all make the person vulnerable. But the fourth thing that you need is, and we may focus a lot of attention on this one, you need a good name in the community. This is what makes running against incumbents so difficult. 9 out of 10 incumbents, better than 9 out of 10, win re-election. Because they get to make a good name for themselves in the community on the taxpayer's dime if they're an incumbent. But for 18 months in a 2-year cycle, there's it's the football game where the opposing team's not even on the field. And so it's a lot easier if you have a good name in the community. And this is why first-time candidates have a very difficult time, even though they think they have a good name.
They have a good name at their kitchen table.
That's right. Yeah, they have sometimes not even that. And so, so we can talk more about that. The fifth thing is just the ability to, well, I guess it's leadership, but it's the ability to gather disparate resources for a common goal, which is the campaign. It's not an easy thing to run a campaign. You're building basically a small business from nothing. You're driving it into bankruptcy on election day, and how to do that in a most effective way is something that many first-time candidates learn during the campaign and fail.
Right.
And they learn all the mistakes they make. So there are many candidates that have to run 2 or 3 times before they kind of all the pieces
figure things out.
That's right. So those are the things that you generally need to be a successful candidate. You don't need any of them to run, but and you may only have one. I mean, I've worked with candidates. All they had was a vulnerable opponent.
Right. And they just...
And they're the other name. And so in a campaign like that, and then your messaging is very different. Your tactics may be very different as well. So it just depends.
Right.
You mentioned candidates. The only thing they have is fire in the belly. They don't know that it's hopeless, and they work so hard. I mean, you can overcome these things.
Okay.
But the more of these you have, and to the greater degree, the better off you'll be.
I think the first 3 are sort of obvious when you get into the campaign. Fire in the belly, winnable district, weak and vulnerable opponent. You can probably gauge that without too much thinking. Maybe you have to spend some more time. Okay, do I really want to do this? Do I really want to put my family through this?
Right.
But the good name in the community. What are the sorts of things that you always suggest that candidates do as a first-time candidate to start building that name in the community?
Well, there's 2 types of candidates. There is the person running to do something and the person running to be somebody. And if you're running to be somebody, then voters will sense that, Hillary Clinton, and react negatively toward that. But if you're running to do something, then if you're that type of person, you care about the community. If you're running to do something, then in all likelihood, you've done things before. The reason why you're running is to help people and help the community be involved. So you should have been involved. And
been
so,
on local school boards, PTAs, something of that nature?
All the above, or any of the above.
Right.
You're just involved.
Right.
And it doesn't have to be blatantly political. I worked with a candidate in Tennessee, in Nashville, and he has 2 daughters. They liked playing basketball, so he started an all-girls basketball league. Well, that's not political in any way. It wasn't a pro-life girls basketball league. It wasn't a concealed carry basketball league for girls. It was just a basketball league. And when he eventually ran for office many years later, or several years later, he had dozens of parents who volunteered and helped. Now, they needed to be trained. They didn't know what they were doing because they hadn't done it before, and that wasn't an interest of theirs. But training is not that hard. You teach them how to go door to door. And
there's plenty of good schools here at the Leadership
Institute
to help people learn how to work on campaigns.
But now you have people who believe in you. You have a good name in the community because you've done things. He had done many other things as well, but they weren't as overtly political as some people think you need to do in order to run for office. It's not, I should join the Kiwanis and I should join the chamber, I should be in the Republican or Democrat club, I should be on someone's finance committee. It's not all that stuff. It can be.
It can be something as simple as I coached basketball here for 12 years. It can be something, I showed up to all of the little Memorial Day events and got to know the community.
In fact, that's a great example.
Went to church.
Coaches of teams make great candidates. Umpires do also, by the way. In fact, the candidate I was mentioning before, in order to, he went to umpire school and learned how to be a referee for the girls' basketball league. So, but coaches make great, doctors make great.
I mentioned
because
coaches.
they know everyone in the community.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I'm sure everyone has that local community doctor that they all go to in order to have that, to have that, and then they all have that name recognition.
Right.
I mentioned coaches. My father was a coach for 12 years and ran for school board and ran unopposed because of that. And,
Right.
Those sorts of things help.
Well, because people didn't want him kicking their kid off the team.
Right. Exactly.
So you can't run against the coach. But these are people well known in the community with typically good reputations, who know a lot of people and have done a lot of good for a lot of people. And that's who makes the best candidate. And so again, in the future candidate school that we teach here at Leadership Institute, we do spend a lot of time on the details of how you do that and how you maximize those efforts so that if and when you become a candidate, that translates to the campaign.
Right. Steve has mentioned a few times that the Future Candidate School is coming up, and I just want to let our viewers know that the next school is July 27th through the 30th. If you would like to attend, then the coordinator has given me a nice code to use, a discount code, and it's Learn to Win. So if you use that code, you are able to get a nice little discount on attending the training, and you will even get to meet Steve Sutton in person. So a plug, this webinar is designed to be a lead-in into that school, so I think that we're going to continue a good conversation today and get us to that school next week.
And it's Learn T-O Win.
Yes, learn.
Not
You don't put to, you put T-O.
Right.
Exactly.
Learn to Win.
So, good name in the community. We talked about that. Go into a little bit more into the ability to gather resources for a common goal, like setting up that team or what have you.
There is a learned talent. It's not something you're born with, certainly. It's interesting because of those 5 things, 2 of the 5 are kind of out of your control: a vulnerable opponent and a winnable district.
Right.
And firing the belly is the simplest. Either you want to do it or you don't. I mean, don't run if you're kind of not sure, or you got to really want to do it.
Speaking on that topic, and I don't want to interrupt you on your.
That's right.
On that.
We'll go back.
Have you ever run into a situation where a candidate thinks they have the fire in the belly and then doesn't? And are there any telltale signs that somebody can see before they get, 8 months down the road and like,
Right.
oh, I don't want to do this anymore?
Well, sometimes, look, every decision you make in life is a leap of faith to some extent.
Right.
You research it, you make a decision. You're not sure, you research it some more. Eventually, when your research is the same over and over again, it's time to make a decision.
Right.
And so people decide they want to run for office. They've done various minimal or maximum research into the process, and they take the dive. It may not be what they thought it was. And if you're the nominee of your party, it's difficult to simply say, I'm quitting. But you give it half the effort that you might have otherwise. And also, there are things that happen. Somebody in your family close to you passes away in the middle of the thing, or you have an accident.
Well, out of control.
And so those are situations. But I think it's fairly rare. I'm trying to think of a specific example where somebody decides to run and then said, this is not really for me. They typically don't withdraw. They just they withdraw from the race in a manner, but they don't actually withdraw. But
right, not a physical, like a mental,
right,
I just don't want to be here kind of thing. Yeah.
And that you could tell, and voters can tell.
Yeah.
Voters can tell if you're not having fun, you think it's a chore, and they'll be able to tell that as well, and that will hurt your ability to connect with people, which leads back to the 5th, which is reason which you want to talk about is that the ability to gather these disparate resources. Again, you've got to. Many and too many candidates micromanage their campaigns. They don't delegate the things that they should, and to do only the things they can only do, and their campaigns suffer for it. There's always more stuff to do on a campaign, and figuring out that process, gathering those resources, and then maximizing the resources in the campaign is a learned talent, and those who learn it best do well. the fact is, Hillary Clinton is running a great race. Now, we may hate the way she's running it, but she is maximizing her assets, minimizing her weaknesses. She may never talk to the press. I love hearing the pundits on TV who know nothing, have never worked on a campaign, and even sometimes they have, they're just not, I just don't think they're very good at it. Not all of them, but she can't refuse to talk to the press. Yes, she can. Who's going to hold her to account? The press that want access should she win and don't want to be blackballed? Yes, she can. She's going to control the process as much as she feels she needs to. I think they're actually running a very smart, very disciplined campaign. And campaigns matter. And as vulnerable as she may be, which is the second or third vulnerable opponent, sure, but she has number 5 in spades. And she's got the best campaign manager in the country, and that's Bill, who I guess feels he owes her. And it's going to be a formidable campaign. They're not going to make many mistakes. And we just need to be ready for that and run. Whoever is the nominee needs to understand it.
Be ready to run a good campaign.
So that's, again, part of the calculus is that it needs to be somebody who's been through it before and knows how to do it.
Right.
And isn't doing it for the first time, and because you make a lot of mistakes. As she has. She lost once before. She made her share of mistakes.
Right. Obviously, so you've brought up the 2016 election, and so we'll stay on this topic a little bit. Obviously, winnable district, the country's winnable.
It is country's winnable. There's a vulnerable opponent.
There's a vulnerable opponent.
Even if Bernie wins. Even if Bernie wins.
I think especially.
As well.
I won't get into that.
And so I think you don't run fire in the belly.
Right.
So
I'm sure all of those candidates have the fire in the belly to make it through.
So now they're in 4 and 5.
Yeah.
I mean, those are the things.
Who are the ones doing 4 and 5 the best?
Well,
give us some examples, just so who do we
Time to
emulate?
throw some people under the bus. Good name in the community. Now, the community is the country.
Yeah.
This is why 15 people announced, I think. The people that are favored in running for president are people that have national organizations. Particularly in a primary, you can't expect your party to help you because they're paralyzed. And even after the primary, often they don't
expect the.
We don't have time to give a 4-day school in 40 minutes, but I do go into more detail. You become the nominee of your party. You go down to party headquarters. And as a first-time enthusiastic Mr. Smith Goes to Washington candidate, you walk in and you ask for the list of yard sign locations and the list of volunteers and the list of donors that you can call. And more often than not, the people down there, they start laughing. They go, "We don't have any of that stuff. What do you think this is?" And they're supposed to, but they don't. And so one very important reason you need a good name in the community and the ability to gather disparate resources is you need to create your own personal alternative infrastructure so that if you go down and the party says, "Here's our list of yard sign locations, here's our list of volunteers, here are the donors that you can call," that's a bonus. That's extra. But more often than not, you're not going to have that. So you have to have that. You need to have the parents of the girls in the basketball league who all want yard signs. And they all want to volunteer in the campaign. And they'll even help you raise money if you just explain to them how to do it.
Right.
So you need that infrastructure. So going back to the presidential race, who has infrastructure? Because in a primary, you don't have it. And 15 people are running. What's the easiest thing for a potential donor, for example, supporter, to say to you? "Well, I'd like to help you, but there's 15 people, there's 14 other people, and if you're the nominee, I'll be there for you. But right now, I can't make a commitment."
Right.
And people hear that all the time. And so, who has the national infrastructure? Well, clearly, Jeb Bush has it. Through brother, father.
Right.
He has a national infrastructure. Yeah. You can argue how strong it is and how committed it is, but he has a national infrastructure that he can tap into. So he's clearly a front runner for that reason alone. Who else has the national infrastructure? Rand Paul. Rand Paul has a national infrastructure. You could argue it should be bigger and it shouldn't be, so many young people, but he has a national infrastructure by
Something's
virtue
there.
of
Yeah.
tapping into what was created before by his dad. That's so he certainly is who's the third person? I mean, you have to kind of look at these things. So, strangely, Scott Walker has a national infrastructure, well beyond what people may think. Mm-hmm. Now, he's just a governor, but he ran in a recall election, and at the time, it was the only election in the country. And the left made him. And so by having the recall in a special election, it allowed him to raise money across the country with no other campaigns, the only game in town, and he built, I imagine, but a very, very large list of donors and infrastructure that is national in scope, going well beyond Wisconsin. So that makes him a front runner, although he's the last one in. Who else has a national following? Well, if you're a billionaire, you can pay for following. And I was joking about that until we found out that, in fact, at his announcement, Donald Trump actually did pay people to be there for him. But you can write a check. Donald Trump once famously said, if I can solve a problem by writing a check, it's not a problem, it's an expense. And wow. So he's putting that to practice now. So he will build or buy enough of an infrastructure to be a finalist. The one exception, in my view, to this rule is Marco Rubio. I think he is lightning in a bottle. He's the real deal, and he's the type of candidate without a national following who could catch fire and create a national following the quickest. Sure. So that's 5 of the 15. Now you may ask, what about the people who ran last time who have national followings?
Okay.
Rick Santorum, Mike Huckabee,
okay.
Rick Perry. Yes, but I'm not sure how strong the national following is. But at least you could make the argument they've got something. I mean, people forget that Rick Santorum did come in second nationally. It was him or Romney when it came down to the final 2. And Rick he won numerous primaries. So there's more of an infrastructure there, I think, than people might think about. You've got Huckabee, but this is going to be a big disadvantage to Dr. Carson, Carly Fiorina, yeah. Chris Christie, I don't think has a national infrastructure. And to try to build one now with everyone else trying to, I think is very difficult. This is why it usually takes more than one cycle to run and win the nomination.
Well, we're talking about good name in the community, and
right.
You just mentioned Chris Christie and said he doesn't have a national following. Do you think he lost a lot of that good name in the community that he built up when he was head of the RGA, and then when all of the things happened with the Bridgegate scandal? Did he lose? Is that what lost him his good name in the community?
I appreciate the opportunity to trash Chris Christie, but I grew up in the Bronx. My wife is from New Jersey, and knowing what I do of politics in New Jersey, I'm going to refrain from saying anything bad about Chris Christie. He's wonderful, love him. But I'm going to talk about the RGA, because that's a good point. One reason people want to be the president of RGA is to get the national following. This gives you an excuse, if you will, a reason to travel the country, visit all these different states, do favors for people and help them out, make a name for yourself, and build your organization. So that's a good example where if you don't have a special recall election, there are things that you can do, be the head of RGA, Republican Governors Association, to get that national exposure. And so that's why that was a good move for him to do. But it's going to be very competitive now. Who is an undecided activist, supporter, donor that is going to commit before the nomination is decided? I mean, find me who those people are. Mm-hmm. I think people are one of 15 committed or undecided till after the primary, And I think there's going to be very little movement until people start dropping out. And the problem that you have now, it's not a problem, but the reality is, with super PACs, you can stay in. There's no, you know.
All the way to a brokered convention?
Well, perhaps. It's still unlikely, because the party apparatus doesn't want that, and although it would be fun to watch. And so that's likely not to happen. As people drop out, they're going to want to pledge their delegates to get some credit and such. But, you know, when I mentioned Bobby Jindal, same problem. I'm not going to talk about has he damaged himself because he's unpopular in Louisiana, and his State of the Union address rebuttal was lukewarm, and, you know, but how does he get to the top 5? I just don't see how do you displace Rand Paul? Even Ted Cruz has more of a national following, but he still has that problem, in my view. But how do you displace Rand Paul, Jeb Bush, Scott Walker, Marco Rubio potentially? How do you displace them? I just don't see it happening. So I think we're locked into those are the top 5 that I mentioned, and I think that's who it's going to kind of come down to, and you just have to play your hand out. Just to make a
So I want to bring things back down from the 2016 election a
Right.
little bit. Before we got into that, you
But
mentioned
that's what local candidates should
Right,
still
you
be
should
looking
be
at the
looking
same
at that.
calculus.
Exactly.
How do you make a name for yourself in the community in whatever capacity? It doesn't have to be protesting abortion clinics outside and chaining yourself to a fence. It doesn't have to be, but how are you helping the community? Because if you're going to try to convince people that you're running because you care, then you should be doing things that show you care. So that's the first thing that candidates should be thinking about. It's not just, I have better ideas, and I'm going to run, and when I get to the debates, I'll convince people. That's a fallacy created, I don't know where.
Fair enough. So we all should be watching the 2016 election and trying to bring it down to our level.
And some of these people are running now to make the name for themselves for future runs. Okay, I'll buy that. Okay, but I think it's safe to say that there's 5 people who are running who we all know are not going to be the nominee,
right?
Or 10 people who we know are not going to be the nominee.
Very true.
So
before we got into this long discussion of the 2016 election,
right.
You mentioned something about candidates making decisions that they have micromanaging the campaign and that sort of thing. I think Morton likes to talk about candidates losing IQ points when they run for office. Right. How do you avoid that sort of situation?
Well, it's hard because
especially in the
right. Well, the candidate has to do this. You know, we have our campaign management school, and that frequently comes up as a question. And the problem is that if you're not the candidate, you have a limited ability to change that dynamic. So, but if you're the candidate, your name's on the stationery. There is and chances are you've been successful in life because you have micromanaged. You've built a company that you micromanaged. Whatever you've done it on your own. And now you're shifting to a campaign where you're being told by everyone, trust us, we know what we're doing, trust your manager, who's some kid maybe still in college or just out of college, trust the fundraising committee to raise the money, or you delegate them to trust the consultants to run the campaign. It's very difficult. So you just have to find people that you trust to fill these positions so that you can delegate these things. There's only a handful of things that only the candidate can do, and there's not enough time in the day to do everything.
Right.
The candidate should be raising money, meeting voters, and dealing with the press. What else is there? Picking the colors of the stationery and I guess they might want to be involved in that, but that doesn't matter. I've seen some pretty crazy colors that win, and we spend more time arguing about who should be sitting at which table at the fundraiser, or what color the campaign's color should be, than we do in setting up a finance committee or developing our theme and message. And then the candidate also has to work on their delivery and their public presence. But those are the things that only the candidate can do. Do those things.
Right.
Stop doing things that other people can do.
Trust your campaign staff
as much as you can. If you can't, it's the wrong campaign staff.
Okay, we have a few questions coming in from our audience, which is great. Keep them coming, and we'll get to some of them now. This one person wants to know their candidate refuses to run a dirty campaign while their opponent threw everything at them.
Right.
Their candidate was completely unprepared to fight back against those things. How do you respond to a situation like that?
I love that question because it suggests that to win, you have to run a, quote, dirty campaign. I completely disagree. I'm glad that the candidate didn't run a dirty campaign. What I hope the questioner is asking is about going negative. And we teach at our schools, I teach, you should never go negative. Never attack your opponent. You should always define your opponent. It is a difference in tone, and it's a difference in approach. And this is what the left does, although they also attack us, but they define us. This is what President Obama is doing, he has been for 6.5 years. He defines conservatives, he defines Republicans, he defines the Tea Party, and that's what you need to be prepared for. You have to be prepared for the way they will define you. And then you have to understand that's what they're doing. And yes, you do need to define them. You can't simply run in a vacuum. You're running against somebody. You have to explain to people why you are better than them. And by that comparison, they are less better than you are. That's the calculus voters are going to make. If you're not prepared to ever mention your opponent or your opponent's shortcomings, surely you're running because you think you would do a better job than the other guy. Well, you should say that. So I think the candidates, the idea that we're only going to be positive and run a, quote, positive campaign. You run a very positive campaign talking about your opponent's shortcomings in kind of a more of a matter-of-fact kind of way, okay? I'm sorry that the president is so partisan. I wish he weren't. That's not attacking him. That's an observation of why we think he shouldn't be reelected, or why Hillary shouldn't be elected. And you have to be able to make that point to people. You certainly made that calculus when you decided to run. You didn't say, I love what the opponent is doing. They're doing a great job, but I'm going to run anyway, because I just think that my ideas are better. No, there's a problem that you're trying to solve. I'm going to run. I think they're doing a bad job. There's nothing wrong in saying that, but there's nothing about attacking them, and it certainly is nothing about running a dirty campaign. So that, in the wording of the question lies, I think, the essence of the problem.
Fair enough. Our next question from our audience is, this person is considering a run for the state house, and they want to know, what should they be looking at to decide and determine if they have the fire in the belly to run. And by that they mean, what reading materials out there, are there any good books you would suggest in order to find out, what are they getting themselves into?
Well, I think rather than reading books, I think talking to people. Again, as conservatives, we like to read books because it isolates us and insulates us from interaction with other people. Go out and talk to people, talk to current, if you're running for the state house, say it's state rep, go out and talk to state reps. What are the sacrifices they had to make during the campaign? What's the impact on their family life after they win? And what's the lifestyle? And is that something that you're going to enjoy and understand the pros and cons? Talk to people who ran and hated it. And then when they tell you why they hated it, well, can I live with that or not? And I just think getting out and talking to people and understanding the lifestyle. As far as the actual campaigning, I'm hoping that people aren't, their first involvement in politics is running for office. So that could be the problem. If you've worked on campaigns, you've seen the interaction of a campaign, and you should have a better sense than that. So maybe before running for office, get involved in a campaign at some level, perhaps on the finance committee, because that's often the most challenging, and just see what's involved. And often you can see what people do wrong that when you run, you won't do. And I think that might give you more insight than reading up on it. I'm not even sure there's very many books that are good to read, because they're not written about state rep races. They're written about presidential races, and the dynamic is just completely different. You're not going to be jetting around the country with the press corps in 3 chartered airplanes. It's a whole different scope of things. So.
Great. Next question.
But to go back to the other one also, ask yourself why. why are you running for office? Why are you thinking of running? Okay? And is it a vanity project? You need to have confidence, but it's a fine line between...
are you doing it for the power, or are you doing it to actually affect change?
Exactly, okay? And so if you're doing it to affect change, is running for office the only way to do it? I mean, there's other things to do. Floyd Flake was a Democrat congressman from New York, Queens or Brooklyn, I think. He resigns from Congress or decides not to run for re-election because he determined, I can have a bigger impact in the community if I'm there helping than I can in Washington voting on legislation. So he actually, the way to help more people was not to run for re-election. I think he was a multiple-term congressman, and he returned and just is working to make his community better in that way. So before you run for office, that's part of the calculus. Why are you doing it? Why do you feel there's a need for you?
Is there a better contribution I have to make?
And are you truly, uniquely the best person, the only person that can make the change in your state capital because the others just aren't? And that may be the case.
Fair enough. We have, the questions are just rolling in now, so we're going to keep going through them.
Okay.
This person is a first-time candidate running against a long-term incumbent. Mm-hmm. The incumbent's main vulnerability is he's relatively inactive. And polling tends to show this as well. Mm-hmm. So their question is, without that time that you mentioned, as a first-time candidate, it's very hard to build that in the community. How do they mount a respectable and successful challenge against a long-term incumbent?
Well, I've worked in campaigns where the incumbent is, for lack of a better word, lazy, mm-hmm. but just, and so you have to offer a contrast, and that contrast would be hardworking. Mm-hmm. So I suggest a very robust, and this will also help with your name in the community, but a very robust door-to-door grassroots campaign, assuming that the district is small enough that you can do that effectively, and be very aggressive. And the candidate, you should be the yin to his yang. If he's the lazy, invisible person, you should be the hardworking person knocking on doors. Just the contrast of those two, without even mentioning that the other guy's lazy, you're inferring it by talking about how hardworking you are. So I think that one of your 3 strategic sayings should be hardworking. If it's true. Mm-hmm. If you're also lazy, then maybe not. I'm not as lazy as he is. That's your bumper sticker. But certainly hardworking. And in fact, the gentleman in Nashville that I mentioned with the girls' basketball league, that was one of our things. Hardworking. We never said the other guy was lazy. It never appeared in our literature.
It's a subtle reference.
But people knew the other guy, and,
mm-hmm.
and they knew that he was not that hardworking. And so the contrast was a strong one for us, without attacking or being negative or running a dirty campaign against the other side. We just made the contrast. You never see the guy, and you're going to see me all the time. So you could talk about all the town hall meetings you're going to hold and all the other things that you're going to do in a very activist way, and that draws the contrast with the other guy. And it'll also help then get you around. I think a very aggressive door-to-door campaign. And you don't even have to be the person knocking, just your volunteers can be. And you can leave literature on the door to tell them that your campaign was there. And I think that would be very effective in that situation.
Very good. Next question. We have many more coming through. Do you have to be actively involved in a major political party? Or is it just as easy to be elected through a grassroots effort?
Great question. I think it's just as easy to be elected through a grassroots organization. If the parties were stronger, then it would be more helpful. But I can't tell you how many times you go down to the party headquarters and they have nothing. They have no resources. But you need to build that infrastructure yourself. Going back to the gentleman from Nashville who ran, that was a nonpartisan race. So there was no party structure. It was just, you run, which gives incumbents a tremendous advantage because they're building this infrastructure. But our guy had infrastructure. And not just, by the way, from the girls' basketball league. There's several other things that he had done in the community. And he had dozens of people who really wanted him on. In fact, they're the ones who convinced him to run in the first place. That's where you want to be. You want people asking you to run rather than, and that goes back to the other gentleman who's thinking of running. Are you going to tell everyone you're running and convince them to help you? Or are there going to be dozens of people saying you should run? and encouraging you to run. That's your first test as to how viable and you are in the community. And so I think grassroots campaigns certainly can win. We've seen that over and over again.
Great. Final question here from the audience for now. How much of an advantage is it to work on a campaign and then be a candidate? Is there any advantage there at all? Is there disadvantages there?
I think the advantage of working on a campaign before you become a candidate is to see all the mistakes that hopefully you're not going to make in your campaign. First campaign I was involved in was a losing one. You know, the counter to that is you want to be involved in a winning campaign so that you have a good taste in your mouth. You know, your first campaign, it's a losing campaign, you swear off politics. Well, the better man did not win, politics stinks, I'm never going to work in campaigns ever again. And so your first campaign should be a winning one. It's like that one good shot in golf. You know, you get that one good shot, you're coming back. And so
takes a few more.
Maybe. And so, but I think being involved in a campaign, it also introduces you to the infrastructure that does exist to the extent that it does. Now, it may be personality driven with that candidate, but it might not be. There's an infrastructure that you can then tap in for your campaign. You're going to meet the people who are involved in campaigns, who like campaigning, who know other people involved in campaigning. So I think there is an advantage to being involved in campaigns, just to get introduced to that. And again, to see in the first campaign I was involved with, I can't tell you all the things I learned what not to do. And I learned what to do by watching the other side as they were beating us. And it was
They're doing it better.
It was really amazing. I said, why aren't we doing that? And it was very famously, I was a little older when I first campaigned, because I was in the Navy, and then when I left the Navy, I managed a congressional campaign. And I was constantly being told, that won't work here, and people aren't like that around here, and we're different, our district is different. And so I popped off one time after several weeks of this, and I said, I just have one question. I go, if you guys are so expert at campaigns, why is this a challenger campaign? Why aren't we the incumbents? And that just irritated the guy, you know. But it's true. So I think there is a real advantage to getting some experience. And also, quite frankly, if you're thinking of running and you know who your senior team is going to be, getting them involved in campaigns to some extent is not a bad idea, to give them a little seasoning, a little experience, but with some self-awareness to know when something's not working. You know, a campaign, the candidate wins, and they did Emory boards with their names on it. So for the next 30 years, everyone's doing Emory boards. Or, you know, the candidate did skywriting. Well, if we do that, then we'll win too. It just doesn't, you know, be careful about being involved in a campaign that wins and thinking that's these silly things.
So the follow-up question this person had was, so is it more important for them to focus on building their name in the community and with that their career, or is it more important for them to get politically involved, or are they equally as important?
If it's an either or, building your name in the community is much more important.
Right.
You're building your own infrastructure, because the campaign techniques you can learn. You can come to the campaign management school here. In 4 days, you're going to know a lot about what to do, and much more than working in a campaign, perhaps. And usually you're working in one aspect of the campaign. And so building your own network and helping your community is always going to be better for a future candidate than getting involved. But I think you can do both.
Sure. Now, just as I said that we were almost out of audience questions, more keep coming in. So this person is interested in running for national office. Their beliefs line up with third party as opposed to the traditional bipartisanship that most candidates side with, as she put it. So she wants to know, should I choose one of the major political parties to affiliate with because of a larger demographic, even if it means compromising certain stances on issues?
Well, the short answer is yes, because we are a two-party country. And running a little counter to what I said before, you can win a grassroots campaign rather than get involved with the party, but you shouldn't reject the party. I'm just saying that often the parties are weak and not going to provide you as much help as you think, hope, wish they did. on a national basis, it's a two-party country. I think it's safe to say we will never elect a third-party candidate nationally or statewide, and Bernie Sanders being the exception, but it's Vermont, and that's barely a state.
Whoa.
I heard they carpeted the whole state last month. It's very tiny, and so.
Hey, if you want any more maple syrup from mine.
That's okay. Never mind then.
That's right.
When somebody shows the one exception out of 100 as an example of why, I don't know. I'd rather look at the 99 out of 100 where it wasn't. But to go to the point where compromise your position, there's 15 candidates running for president. They don't agree on every issue. They just don't. There's plenty of room in either party for people who have a very specific issue matrix. I think that, so my answer is one of the major parties. I just don't think third party is the way to go.
Okay, fair enough. We're almost to the end of today's webinar, so I want to just ask you one final question that I'm sure we could spend a whole webinar discussing anyways. In the process of deciding if you're going to run for office or not, how important is message development?
Message development is the critical step that we spend in our 4-day schools a day and a half discussing, because it is the single biggest and most glaring weakness on our side. We commonly say, people agree with us on the issues, the old joke, we win every debate, but we lose every election. Now that's less true than it used to be, but the left has only survived because of their messaging, which is superior to ours. And so, can't give the whole messaging lecture, but at the campaign management school, I think I give 4 to 6 hours of messaging lecturing. So that's a lot. I can't do it in 4 to 6 minutes or even less.
Right.
And so focusing on the message and the way to deliver it, not in a duplicitous way, in a way that people understand and find compelling to convince them. That's the point. It's not lecturing people. It's engaging in a discussion where you tap into what they already believe, and you're the candidate that best exemplifies that, not just articulates it, but it exemplifies it. And if we lose 2016, it will be because of message. It will not be because of activists, volunteers, money. It won't be any of that. It'll be message. We lost 2012 because of message. We were out-messaged. And candidates that don't understand this are putting themselves and their philosophy at a tremendous disadvantage. So how you develop that message, come to the campaign schools and you will learn. And the light bulbs go off once we go through the process and people start to understand what messaging really is and what it's not. But it's themes, it's contrast, and it's larger than being issue specific. It's the reason why people may agree with you on the issues but don't vote for you, or disagree with you on issues and then vote for you. Reagan won 49 states when he ran for re-election, not because everyone agreed with him on the issues. And so we discuss that and explain why. And there are sometimes states where they'll vote for a Ronald Reagan for president and then a liberal for U.S. Senate in the same election. Why is that? And we discuss that. And how do you appeal to those swing voters that are the reality? I'm not making it up. It is what it is. And that's the way people decide.
It is what it is.
And we need to understand that. So, yeah, message development's crucial. If you get your message wrong, you could do all the tactics in the world, you'll be reinforcing the wrong message. You'll actually be hurting yourself.
Right.
If you get the right message, you do enough tactics and you're going to be in good shape. And so that's the challenge for our side, I think.
Great. We have one final question to the audience,
Sure.
and I'm going to give you 1 minute to answer this question.
Okay.
And then we have to close things out.
Absolutely.
How far in advance should you announce your candidacy?
Well, the book on announcing is announce early and raise money. Keep in mind there's different phases to a campaign. So it's not announce, begin campaigning. The first phase of your campaign is your organizational phase. You can announce early, or at least let people know that you're running, but announce early, and then you're in the organizational phase. You're building your finance committee. You're building your infrastructure of volunteers. You're getting people trained for jobs they may not be trained for. That all takes time, and the sooner you begin that process, the better. And only after you're organized, written campaign plan, have gone to LI's campaign management school, then you can begin to start meeting voters, because now you're prepared. You know what your message is going to be, you know how to articulate your message, and now you can have a conversation with donors that helps your campaign rather than hurts your campaign. How many campaigns have been knocked out in the first week because they said something stupid because they weren't organized? So announce early, start raising money. You don't want to sneak up on people and announce the day before the filing deadline when no one else has filed. That's just nonsense. Announce early, or let it be known I'm running or I'm seriously considering running, and start to get the supporters, so when somebody else announces after you and goes after them, they will tell the other person, oh, I wish I had known, but I agreed to support you first. You don't want to be the guy that people are telling, oh, if I had known, but I agreed to support your opponents.
Don't lose any ground by announcing.
Exactly. So that's the yeah.
Great. Well, 5 takeaways: fire in your belly, winnable district, weak, vulnerable opponent, good name in the community, and the ability to gather resources and bring everything together for that common goal, including messaging.
Right.
Great conversation today about should you run for office. I think our viewers have a better idea of what that all is.
Great.
So thank you for joining us today on this topic.
You're very welcome, and come to the Future Candidate School. You will learn 4 days worth of this, not just 40 minutes of it. It's,
Exactly.
It's important stuff, and you'll come out really prepared to make the decision whether you should run or not.
Exactly. Well, if you want this has been a great conversation today. Again, if you want to meet Steve Sutton in person and get the questions that were not answered on air, then attend one of our schools. Coming up, we have the Future Candidate School on July 27th through the 30th. And again, if you use the code LEARN2WIN, that's TO, then you will receive an additional discount on that school. Coming up, we also have a campaign management school, which you'll hear 4 hours of Steve Sutton message about lecture about messaging, which would be great. So take a look at our schedule and attend one or all of those trainings, and you'll be ready to go for the next election.
And if you can't make it, send somebody who's close to you, who you trust, and get people trained.
Exactly.
We've had people go to the campaign management school, and in 4 days, they can manage a congressional campaign successfully. We've seen it done over and over, and certainly for smaller races, very doable. U.S. Senate race, that's a different story perhaps, but it's just a question of scale at some level. And we've had people go through the school and successfully manage congressional campaigns, and that's exciting. So,
Great.
So send people, send 2 or 3, and they'll know what to do.
Great. Yeah, and then for our next webinar, it's going to be on July 29th. That'll be again on July 29th at 3 p.m. It should be a great time. Steve will talk about all of the great career opportunities that come with the 4 Ps of excellence. And with that, I would like to remind you all that this webinar has been recorded and will be online at leadershipinstitute.org/activism on demand. With that, have a good night and thank you for joining.